Good morning. This morning, I'm talking about acceptance. And one of the reasons I chose this topic is because it is the one thing I find with my clientele, and I was going to say students as well, but it seems to be the one thing that we don't want as humans. We want things to be the way we want them. And consequently, we get very, very upset and can react in many ways. I was just thinking of a few this morning: angry, sulky, disappointed, and sad. Mostly mad or sad comes because we really want things to be the way we want. Unfortunately, as adults, we learn that we can become more, that we do not have to be responsive emotionally to something that is not exactly the way that we want. It's okay to accept inside and say, I'm really feeling upset about this, or I'm really feeling angry, or I'm feeling disappointed. Because we must acknowledge our emotions. I'm certainly not saying that, not to do that, because I find that is very, very important. But I see so many people that even events years ago that has happened, and they just still haven't accepted the outcome of that. And it rides with them. So we really want to understand that the whole concept of the word acceptance, what that means. I came to an understanding through acceptance through the tarot, as I have done with many, many things, because the 12th symbol of the higher arcana is the hanged man, who's hanging upside down, looking quite happy with it, actually, and has a lot of his legs and his arms actually, in a sense, form crosses as well. So there is some Christian mythology in their pictures that it kind of go into that whole element of accepting the realities of what happens. So what it taught me was, it's because it's number 12, it's sort of the higher value of a number 3, which is the Empress, which is love. So I began to realize that love was acceptance and forgiveness. And, excuse me here, and as we look at that more and more of acceptance, we also find very often we need to forgive ourselves. What do we need to give ourselves for? Often it's our guilt or regret, or we're wishing it to be something different. But I'll come back to that in a moment or two. Over the years, I created a model that when an event happens, very often what will happen is we will respond sad or mad, which is angry or depressed. But the real value is what lies beneath that, the value of helplessness. It's because we feel helpless of having it be any different. And what I have found that people don't teach that. I do. I tell my clients about it. I draw out my model. I talk about it quite extensively. That if you start to feel mad or sad about something, look at where you feel helpless. What is it you really are feeling helpless about? Because if you go deeper than the helplessness, what you find is that somewhere in there, you feel unworthy. What is it we feel unworthy about? But we do. It's amazing. And it's even when we finally go into what I call connecting with source, or if you want to call God or the universal love energy, that you begin to realize is that you're not unworthy at all. And because you're not unworthy, you really aren't helpless, and you can make a different decision about what you want to do with this situation. Now, often in the situation that you're having this reaction to, you can't do anything about it. It's not in your hands. It's something that's been brought to you, that has been given to you, and now you have to deal with that. So what is your decision? Is your decision to ponder over it mentally over and over and over? If only I could have done this, or perhaps I should have done that. And that is where things begin to get complicated. When we have a understanding, I'm going to use the word spiritual or philosophical understanding, that there is a bigger power and that we can have trust and faith in life and this universal energy that is there to support us, it does make us easier to trust, because I find people really do not trust in the universe God or whatever you believe in. I find there's so many names now that it's just absolutely unbelievable. And very often when we use the word God, people have a reaction, which I always, if I'm around, I'll say, go do a word chain, which I teach people how to do. So you take the intensity out of any word. A word is a word. It's what you make it, it's what you put into it that's important. So having trust and faith makes it easier to accept. But not always do people have trust and faith. In fact, it's one of the elements I always suggest people who are working on transformational work with me, is that we work on, at some point, on trust and faith, because to find out where we're blocking that, for what reason, very often past lives, etc. But still, we need to have that trust and faith. Now, one of the biggest elements that comes in is when somebody dies that is close to us, especially when they're young. Somehow we accept it when we get older that, yeah, it's their time, or they're ready to go, or whatever. And it's easier to accept. But when somebody is young or in their prime, or it doesn't make sense sometimes to us, because it's not the natural event of how things happen. And acceptance can be difficult. In fact, this is when our own emotions come into play, our guilt over what we could have done, our regret over what we should have done. I've had that experience, and I find even now, which is nearly 2 years later, I find myself having to take mental command of my world. I'm sorry. I find that I have to take mental command over me. I have to take and just say, I'm not going there. You're not going to go there. Because what we want is, all we're doing is beating ourselves up. And if we love ourselves, that's not the thing to do. It doesn't help. Now, this can be put in any situation. When we start in saying, well, maybe we should have done this, or we could have done that, or the coulds and the shoulds and the have tos and all that from back there has no place in present day, because what's done is done. And therefore we need to accept, and this is the next step, is forgiveness. To forgive ourselves. Now, if you do not have a connection with some source or some belief in something bigger than you, forgiveness is like foreign language, totally. Like, what is that? For me, it is something that I learned many years ago when I was studying spiritual prosperity, actually. The lady by the name of Adrienne Gaines, she was a Unity minister. And I followed her, traveled, took her workshops, became a teacher of her program, actually, and found that the whole concept of, actually, my major thing of learning was trying to figure out the tithing element. But I really understand when her 4 principles was one of them is forgiveness. And I found that by forgiving myself for what I did during the day, now I need to retract a bit. One of the things Adrienne said in one of her early talks that I went to was that you needed to forgive yourself every day. And I honestly thought she was crazy, because at that point I had just gone through a spiritual awakening, you might say connection, and I felt incredibly empowered by this loving force that I knew within my bones that everything was forgiven. And so that was neat. And I was still in that kind of, it's not exactly euphoria, but a knowing that I was forgiven. And here's this spiritual teacher telling me we forgive ourselves every day. Well, it didn't take me too much longer to realize how much we judge ourselves by what we say, what we do, how we did it. And it runs around in our heads as to how we could change it, how we could do it. Why didn't we do it this way? Why were we this? Why were we that? And then I began to actually do a review and forgive myself wherever I was holding judgment on myself. So now that enters another element, is what are we judging about ourselves? This is where we get to accept we're human. We're going, and we're here for a journey of experience, to expand, to grow, to become more than. And so every time we judge ourselves, what we're doing is we're closing the walls, we're beating up on ourselves. And if we absolutely understand that we're loved by that larger power, whatever you want to call that power, because it does exist when you get in connection with it, you know it's real. We just have to learn how to forgive ourselves for being who we are. And so I began to work with forgiveness. And I found as I began to work with forgiveness for myself, it's not about other people, by the way. Everyone says, forgive of this or that or what they've done. What, you had a part of it, even if you were little, your soul was there. And so there comes a part of when you forgive, and when you forgive yourself, it's easier to forgive others. I found that for myself, it wasn't easy for me to give other people until I'd forgiven my part of it, especially as an adult. So we have acceptance, we have forgiveness, we have trust and faith. Either one of those doesn't seem to really work. It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. It doesn't really work if you only have one or the other. So every day, you need to be aware of what you're fighting in relation to your life. What is it you do not want to accept? Because once we accept what is, and actually the acceptance is 100%. That was the other thing I tell my client. Until you accept 100% of what is, you are not free to make a decision. Now, I know this. I learned this years and years ago, and yet I put myself in a situation where I would accept 98%, but I still had 2% that I was hoping there would be a change. Eventually, I realized nothing was going to change. So sometimes you may know something philosophically, you may know something in some way of how that is supposed to work, but you still don't utilize it. Because we hope, oh man, do we hope? We hope and pray and all that how we want things to be will be. But the moment you choose 100% to accept that what is, in other words, this is it, you are free then to make a decision. And it took me a long time to really realize what that freedom is, because that really is freedom. Because you can decide, oh, well, I'll just accept this is how it is and carry on as everything is, because now I accept it's not going to change. Or you're going to accept this is not good enough for me. This is not what I want. Because usually when you're running, it's not what you want anyway. But sometimes when you accept 100%, that's the way it's going to be. And that comes down, we come back to when people leave us for various reasons, or that they die, whether they decide they don't want to be with us anymore, they don't like us anymore, or whatever. There comes a point where you need to accept that 100% and make a decision on how you're going to deal with that. How are you going to handle that? What are you going to do with it? And your life begins to open up again. And that's when, for me, excuse me, I did, because I understand the process of life, when the death process came into my world, that more than somebody I was expected, and it was a person, it was someone really close, I was able to accept the mechanics. But the day-to-day of my mind saying, when it would want to go back and relive what I could have done differently, that maybe would have made a difference. I have to be very strong in my own mental awareness. I can't let that go back there, because there's no win. In the acceptance of what is. Now, people who have studied with me will hear me say, everything just is. I call it isness, as I've heard students say. The one thing I really got was about isness. It just is. Because if you can accept it just is, then you can choose to accept it and decide what you want to do about it, which may be nothing, but it may also bring about a big change of an awareness of the direction of how you want things to be and where you want them to go and how you want them to relate. It's all so interesting. So we've got to accept something, to forgive ourselves for whatever if we need to, and having trust and faith in the process of life. And that's where I find often there's a big lack. We don't have trust and faith. So every day, what are you accepting? What are you forgiving? As I mentioned, I will tend to do a review and forgive myself. I have certain prayers that I do where I forgive myself, and I've even got to the point, and I'm not talking about so much about forgiveness today, but acceptance, where I'll forgive myself for anything I've ever done throughout all time. And that's kind of, and it's amazing how more clear and relief you get. So it's part of the whole process of acceptance. We cannot forgive ourselves for anything until we accept that it's real. We cannot have trust and faith in the process of whatever unless we accept where we are now. We teach goal setting. We teach goal setting. We teach awareness. We teach growth about how we can move. But always it's how we are in the inside of ourselves. How do we feel? Do we feel that connection? Going back to my model, are we in that sad man? I find so many people that come in and they're really running a lot as sad, either usually depressed more than angry, but it's the same. It's the flip side of the same coin as far as I'm concerned. And once they begin to look at their helplessness, once they begin to see that really they feel helpless because they cannot change whatever it is that's making them sad or mad, they begin to accept. If they really want to get into the work, they will work out the unworthiness, because we're all worthy to be happy. We're all worthy to enjoy what is happening and going on in our lives. And that is that connection to the source of whatever is. So I'm going to go back for a moment to the hanged man hanging out, comes suspended by one leg as he hangs upside down, smiling, and the nimbus, which represents his aura, golden bright. Smiling, is quite happy. He's accepted his lot of wherever he is. And for those of you that listened a few weeks ago when I read the initiation story, when I came to the hanged man, because it is so important to accept where we are, because we don't move on. We do not move on until we've accepted. And again, it's not 98%, it's 100% of the acceptance. Not always easy, not always easy at all, but so important. So it's a point of really taking an inventory of your world. What is it that you do accept? What is it you don't accept? Do you have trust and faith? Do you have a lot of guilt or regret? That needs to get cleared. That needs to be forgiven. That needs to be let go of, so that you can open your life up to all the possibilities that can be brought to you. Now, I just want you to understand that acceptance brings peace. It's a feeling of belonging when you recognize that the universal force is there, and that if you're feeling separate, it's because you separate yourself because you're lost in the feelings, and that you haven't accepted what is. And again, just to reiterate, when you accept what is 100%, you will make the decisions necessary to make the changes that you wish you had. And so I wish you all an acceptance time, and a time of acceptance. I think that it's like a review that we do as we move forward. Now, I'm just wishing that you all can do this easily. I never find it always easy myself, even though I know how it works, because we are who we are and we want things to be the way we want them. And the thing is, it's not. So that's going to end that part of my talk today. So if you have enjoyed this Norma talk, please press subscribe if you're watching by YouTube, or write to me via my website, www.normacowie.com. And I'm always open to hear topics you would like to hear about. So until next week, when the topic will be the importance of having a philosophy, enjoy your week and love one another. Bye for now.